In the beginning, there was only wilderness. Dense forests stretched endlessly, broken only by rivers that glittered like silver under the sun. This was the land the Europeans would one day call America, though in the early 1600s it was a world of uncertainty, danger, and promise. When the first English settlers arrived in 1607, stepping onto the soil of what would become Jamestown, they had no idea that they were taking the first steps toward a rebellion that would shake an empire. They came searching for opportunity, for wealth, for escape. Yet, in their struggle for survival, something was quietly forming, something no one could yet see, a new identity. Life in the early colonies was harsh beyond imagination. Starvation stalked the settlers like a silent predator. Disease crept through the camps. Some settlers disappeared into the woods, never to return. Others whispered of conflicts with native tribes, of arrows striking from the shadows. But through every hardship, the settlers adapted. They learned to plant tobacco, which would become their golden treasure. They built small wooden homes, planted fields, and began to understand the rhythms of a land unlike any they had known. They were still English subjects, loyal to a distant king, but slowly, the colonies were becoming something else, an experiment in survival, independence, and freedom. As the years passed, more colonies appeared as if drawn by an invisible hand. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Maryland, each planted with its own beliefs, its own culture, its own dreams. What none of these settlers knew was that these small, scattered communities would one day unite to challenge one of the greatest powers in the world. For now, however, they were focused simply on living. Many came seeking religious freedom, a chance to worship without fear. Others wanted land, a commodity scarce in England but abundant in America. Opportunities opened, societies grew, and children born in the colonies began to think of themselves not as English, but as something different, colonial, American. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the British Empire was watching. At first, the colonies were little more than distant outposts, useful but not vital. But as the years turned into decades, Britain realized that the colonies were becoming incredibly valuable. Their tobacco, timber, furs, and later wheat and rum filled British ships and enriched merchants. And with wealth came control. Britain began to enforce policies designed to ensure that the colonies served the empire's economic interests. Laws known as the Navigation Acts required that colonial goods be shipped only on British vessels. Certain products could be sold only to Britain. Customs officials patrolled harbors, searching for smugglers. Every crate, every barrel, every product was watched. The colonists noticed. At first, they accepted these policies as the price of belonging to a powerful empire. But beneath the surface, resentment began to stir. The colonists were producing the goods, yet London controlled the profits. Hard-working farmers and merchants found themselves restricted by rules made thousands of miles away, rules they had no voice in shaping. And the seeds of tension were planted. Still, open conflict was far away. The colonies continued to grow. Towns turned into cities, farms into plantations, scattered settlements into thriving commercial centers. The Atlantic Ocean, once a dividing barrier, now connected the colonies to the world. Ships came and went, carrying goods, letters, soldiers, and taxes. The colonists still saw themselves as British, but a hint of separation was beginning to form. They spoke English, but their Englishness was fading. They developed accents of their own, customs of their own, expectations of their own. Then came a spark. The colonists did not ignite a conflict that began far from their towns and fields, yet would change everything. In the mid-1700s, Europe was embroiled in the global struggle known as the 7 Years' War. In America, it was called the French and Indian War. It was a brutal contest for control of North America between the British and the French, each supported by powerful native allies. And it dragged the colonies into a storm they were not prepared to face. The war began in the thick forests of the Ohio River Valley. Traders, settlers, and soldiers clashed with French forces who built forts deep in contested territory. A young officer named George Washington, just 22 years old, was sent by the British to deliver warnings to the French. His confrontation ended in bloodshed, and the war erupted like a sudden blaze. The colonies were swept into the fighting. British redcoats marched through unfamiliar terrain, their bright uniforms easy targets in the shadowed woods. Native warriors struck with silent precision, vanishing before British troops could even return fire. Settlers fled from frontier towns as raids swept through the wilderness. Supply lines collapsed. Chaos spread. And yet, through hardship and loss, something unexpected happened. The colonies fought not separately, but together. Soldiers from Virginia stood beside men from Massachusetts. Maryland's farmers fought near New York's young recruits. For the first time, colonists who had once seen themselves as strangers began to experience a shared struggle. They were learning to fight as one. After years of brutal conflict, Britain finally emerged victorious. The French ceded vast territories, and the British Empire expanded dramatically. But victory came with a terrible cost. Britain was drowning in debt incurred to protect the colonies, or so Parliament claimed. In London, ministers looked at the colonies and saw not loyal subjects, but a source of revenue. Someone, they believed, had to pay for the staggering expenses of war. The colonists did not yet know what was coming, but the British government, desperate for money, was preparing new rules, new taxes, new demands, all aimed at the colonies. And those demands would ignite a storm. In taverns, whispers began. Why should colonists pay taxes to a parliament they had no voice in? Why must they follow laws made by men who had never seen the American wilderness, who knew nothing of frontier dangers or colonial struggles? The distance between Britain and the colonies, once only physical, was becoming political, emotional, ideological. Children born after the war grew up never having seen Britain. They heard stories of the king and parliament, but their loyalties lay in the towns where they lived, the fields they farmed, the land they claimed as their own. A quiet, invisible shift was taking place. People who once proudly called themselves English were beginning to think differently. They were not British, not fully, not anymore. They were American. What no one realized in 1763, not the king, not Parliament, not even the colonists themselves, was that the war had changed the future. Britain believed the colonies owed them a debt of gratitude. The colonies felt they had earned greater freedom. Two perspectives, two worlds, slowly drifting apart. And beneath it all, a tension built like a tightening string. A disagreement about taxes would become a protest. A protest would become a crisis. A crisis would become a rebellion. And a rebellion would become a revolution. But in 1763, the story was only beginning. The roots of rebellion had taken hold, deep in the soil of a land that was no longer simply a colony. A storm was gathering, unseen yet unstoppable, and soon it would erupt into flames that would change history forever.